Good morning, family. Today's message is called, Are You Ready for Worship? Are you ready for worship? And in Psalm 26, our text for this morning, many scholars believe that it may have been an entrance liturgy, meaning that a pilgrim would travel up to the temple for worship, and this may have been some of the words that were said as they entered into the temple. Now, one thing to be sure of is that the presence of God is holy, and that means that that holiness will burn away all impurities, all sin, all things that are not of God. And I think for this psalmist here, he or she wanted to make sure that they were ready for worship, that they were ready to enter into the gates of the true and living God. We see God as omniscient and omnipresent, being everywhere at once, knowing all things. But for Israel, I think they viewed God's presence more as local in the temple. They felt as though and believed, and the Bible teaches, that God dwelt in between the wings of the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the most holy place in the temple. And so literally the presence of God dwelled there. And so when they approached the temple for worship, they were really are about to be in the audience of God, so to speak. And, they wanted to make sure that they were ready. And so the psalmist begins and he says, Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in integrity and I have trusted in the Lord. I shall not slip. Now, this may be quite literal, the journey that the person has come on, that they have walked, and along this journey, they have not gone to either the left or the right. Now, this is a metaphor, obviously, walking in integrity and walking with sure footing, meaning the feet will not slip. Now, one surefire way to avoid your feet slipping is to be walking on sure ground, solid ground, with a firm footing. When we set our feet onto the crooked places and the crooked paths, it may be more difficult to traverse that type of terrain. And so the psalmist is saying that in the journey to the temple and also in the journey of his or her life, that this person has walked upright and walked with integrity. And I think this is the first step in being ready for worship. Now, the psalmist goes on and calls for the Lord to examine him or her. Examine me, O Lord, and try me. Test my kidneys and my heart. Now, I'm reading from a translation from the Word Biblical Commentary, and this is a literal translation, my kidneys and my heart. And the kidneys were seen as sort of the inner thoughts, the inner emotion of a person. And so it's a literal way of saying, in a certain kind of way, my heart, right? And you say, well, the next part says my heart. Why does it say my heart twice? Well, in ancient literature, in biblical texts, heart was associated with the mind, the rational sort of thinking. And maybe we think of those things opposite. And so in most translations, in the NRSV, I believe it says, Examine me, O Lord, and try me, test my heart and my mind. Now, the psalmist has already spoken of the walk that he or she has been on the way to the temple, which is an outer experience. I have not touched or seen or tasted anything that is not of God, and I have not walked off the straight and narrow path. But now the psalmist is talking about the inner life, the thought life, and the emotional life of a person. And those are important as well in terms of getting ready to worship God, that we have to check our minds and check our hearts and establish even within ourselves that, hey, am I thinking about the things of God? Are my emotions moved by the things of this world? Or are my emotions, meaning my joy, my happiness, all of those things, do they come from within? Do they come from my connection with God, or they come from somewhere else? Now, he says, for your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked constantly in your faithfulness. I have not sat with men of falsehood, nor will I consort with dissemblers. I have hated the assembly of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. Now, first, the psalmist denotes the loving kindness of God, meaning that even in the midst of this walk that the psalmist has been on, even in the midst of this internal inquiry, the psalmist has found that God has been loving and kind, merciful and faithful in God's dealing with the psalmist. And because of that, the psalmist wants to maintain this integrity and this purity by avoiding people who are moving in a different direction, avoiding people that may be on a different path. Now, we know in life that this can be difficult. You can't just avoid everyone who you think is a sinner, although some do try. Amen. And that may be difficult to navigate around maybe people in our family, people that we encounter in our communities, people sometimes even in our own churches. Amen. And so the psalmist here has sort of secluded his or herself from people that the psalmist believes to be of poor character or lacking the integrity or fidelity to the God that the psalmist loves and desires to worship so much. Now, this part is a little bit tricky in modern terms. We can't just avoid all sinners and all wicked people and all evildoers. God calls us to preach, to teach, to engage. But I think the point here is that in terms of how we hang out, fraternize, socialize with others, we're not standing in the midst of others while they are committing evil acts. Although we may encounter them along our way, we do not participate with the activities that they may be involved in. And this, I think, in the psalmist's view, makes him or her ready for worship. Lastly, the psalmist says, I will wash my hands in innocence and will go around your altar, O Lord, to hear the sound of praise and to recount all your wondrous deeds. O Lord, I have loved the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Now, washing the hands in innocence may refer to a sort of purity ritual. Obviously, we wash our hands before we eat, but in this time, the people of Israel, like many Muslims today, would wash in a ritual sort of cleansing before they engaged in worship of God. They wanted to make sure that not only was their walk clean, not only was their heart clean, not only was their mind clean, not only had they not engaged or fraternized or socialized or participated in the evil doings of others, but they also wanted to make sure that their hands were clean, that their physical body was clean, so that when they went into worship, there were no areas that were unchecked or overlooked. Now, the psalmist also says, and it seems that at this point the psalmist has been admitted into worship, and the desire is to hear the sound of praise and to recount all of the wondrous deeds of God. And the psalmist says, oh, I have loved the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Now, this is sort of a sore spot because obviously we are not able to participate in that activity in this particular time. Coming into the house of the Lord, hearing the choir sing, hearing people recounting testimonies of all of the great things God has done in their life. And that's difficult. It's a loss. The journey of life that we've been on, we've tried to do our best to, walk that straight and narrow path, but the circumstances now have kept us from being in the house of the Lord, where the Lord's presence dwells amongst the people. But we know that God is with us wherever we are. And so I pray that as we are on our respective journeys, that we are ready for worship, that we are ready and we have walked a straight and narrow path, that we are ready and we have checked our hearts and our minds, that we are ready and we have not participated in evil doing, even that we are ready and we have cleansed ourselves, spiritually and physically, of all unrighteousness. And then we can participate in this worship of God wherever we are, with whomever we are with, and hopefully one day we will be together again soon. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. I pray that we are all always at the ready for worship. And I also encourage you all to come on out to our drive-in service, which will be on the first Sunday of September with Reverend Linda Culberson. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and have a great day.